Hey everybody, this is Drew Mazurek with Universal Audio, and in this video, I'm going to walk you through how I have my studio set up and configured. So let's get started in this main console window here. I have a session called Default Setup. This is a session that I have created, and I have everything configured the way I like all of my sessions to begin, and then I have saved it, and I've locked it in the Finder using the little checkbox in the Get Info window. This allows me to use this as a starting point for all sessions, and everything will be just as I like them to be. And then the first thing I do is come up to this file menu and do Save As, and save it into my Session Docs folder. This way, every session gets its own unique document that is created from this default. The next thing I want to discuss is the fact that I'm only showing the channels that I want to see, and I've hidden the others. This is done here in the menu, view, show, hide inputs. If you click on that, you'll get these little power buttons at the bottom. Green means they're showing, not green means they're hidden. When you're finished, you can hit done, and you're left with the channels that you want. You can also see that you can give them custom names. I have my preamps named as well as various other things that I'll talk about in future videos. The cool thing about both of these is that they are stored and recalled per session, and this allows you to create documents that are configured for a given task. In future videos, you'll see that I will load up console sessions that look quite different than this default setup. For those of you that are interested, we can take a quick look at this voiceover channel that you're hearing my voice come through. It's a Shure SM7. And I've got it plugged into a Neve 88RS, and I got a little bit of a gate on it, a little bit of compression, which is only kicking in when I get kind of loud, touch of EQ, just to kind of sweeten it up a little bit. From there, using the de-esser, the Oxford suppressor, which is just knocking off the S's a little bit, pretty standard fare there. And then lastly is this limiter, which is really not even engaging at all. It's just there to add some clean gain to this signal so that these videos don't need to be mastered or manipulated in any way. My goal is to be able to spit these out quickly, possibly even daily as needed. One last little thing to mention here while we're looking at this part of the console window, you'll notice that I have my primary mic inputs numbered and stored as a part of this default. These numbers correspond to the mic lines I have out in the studio. So every session starts out with these numbers down here. And then once I do my save as and I begin to customize the session, I'll click on them and change them as needed. So kick, for example, snare, etc. And you'll notice that I leave those numbers there so that I'm always able to quickly see what channels I'm dealing with and how they correspond to how I have it set up out in the studio. So that's just a little workflow trick you might want to try in your sessions. Okay, the next thing I want to look at is in this area over here on the right hand side, and it's my auxes. I have some effects pre-configured. I have an EMT 140 here with some basic settings that I like to use as starting points. Plate A, 2.5, filtering out all the bottom end, 100% wet, and then Cooper Time Cube, some similar basics, quick little slap settings. You'll notice I also have them all already set to Unity for all cues. This means that it's very quick to come over, grab a send, turn it up, and not only do I get it, but it's in all of the cues, which is a pretty standard way I want to have things configured. The other thing you'll notice in this area is the Tone Lux Tilt Live EQ, low DSP, no latency. It's not going to mess with my delay compensation. And I'm just doing a band pass, a high pass and a low pass, just to focus that talkback tone into the headphones a little bit. Next up, we're going to take a look in the settings menu, hardware tab. Take a look at some of the details of this system that I have here at my studio. So I have 4 Apollos. There's also a satellite on this. So there's 5 devices, but of course satellite DSP is not seen or utilized by console, so it's not going to show up here. That's used for your DAW only. I have an Apollo X16, and I have it designated as the A or monitor unit. You can see that with the little speaker icon. This is a special designation because it is the master unit. It's responsible for your monitor outs, your alt mons, as well as your cues. It's also clock master. So in my case, it's important that I have my best unit as the monitor unit. So I'm utilizing its D to A and its superior clocking. Next up, I have two X8Ps, and I just labeled them 1 and 2 to differentiate them. They're also color coded as well. And lastly, I have a Twin X that sits on my desktop, and you'll see that it has the little microphone icon, and that's because it has automatically taken over talkback duties in my system. It also automatically takes over monitor controller functionality, so all of that is right there at your fingertips. The only other thing I want to mention in this area here is to talk briefly about channel DSP pairing. This is a new feature that we added fairly recently, and it allows you to gang up chips and pair them together for more complex signal chains. And you'll see on the X16, I'm leaning more towards virtual channels as opposed to DSP pairs, because you have to strike a balance between those two. DSP pairs utilize virtual channels to connect the chips together inside your Apollo. I have my master unit leaning towards virtual channels, and I'll do a whole video on virtual channels and their uses. Whereas on the X8Ps, where all my mics come in, DSP is king here, so I want more pairs. The Twin X doesn't really matter. I don't use the virtuals for that. There are other things in this options area, and I'm going to just skip over that for now. We'll look at these things as needed in future videos. Lastly, let's take a quick look. Up here, we've got some basics: sample rate, clock source, digital mirroring. Digital mirroring allows you to mirror your monitor outs. The same signal that would go to the mon left, right analog outs can also be sent to your SPDIF or a AES output in case you're driving digital monitors. It does not work for ADAT though. Input delay compensation. This is what ensures that whatever processing that you're doing in console is compensated for before being sent to the DAW. I keep it at medium. We now have 4 settings, well 5: off, short, medium, medium long, and long. I keep it at medium. If I go beyond that, console will alert me and I can come back to this menu and make an adjustment. My Q bus count is 4. I'm going to do a dedicated Q video in the future. My alt count is 2, and I've assigned the function switch, which on the Twin allows me to select my 3rd pair of monitors. So I have 3 sets of monitors connected. Lastly, we have headroom and monitor mode. Headroom, I keep it set to 24, or plus 24 rather. This ensures when I connect professional analog gear, it will send and receive the appropriate voltage and maintain as much of that gear's headroom as possible. Monitor mode is stereo. I may do a future video on surround, but we'll leave it there for now. Okay, let's jump over to the I/O matrix tab. Just moving from left to right, we have 2 modes here, custom and default. Default will configure the maximum I/O for the devices connected, and then the moment you make a change, this changes to custom. Then you can store and recall your I/O presets here. You'll notice that I have one called All Mics 8 Lines. This is my default recording I/O preset. I am a Pro Tools user, and you may or may not know this, but Avid artificially limits the amount of I/O that you can see at any one time. So I have to create an I/O preset specific for recording. This one I call All Mics and 8 Lines, and as you can see, all of my microphones come up here. The first 2 X8Ps, I'm utilizing the custom name, right? So here's the device name. Here's the generic name that the driver calls it based on the device letter and what it is. But I don't like that. I want to use a custom name. These custom names are reported to Core Audio, and they will be imported by your DAW. So in a future video or later in this video, when I look at Pro Tools, you'll see that these custom names come up. I have my 16 mic inputs. I have the Twin X inputs labeled CR control room in 1 and 2. And then down here at the bottom, I have my external mic preamps that come into the X16's line inputs. Down here, I have aux A configured to be an input for those rare instances where I want to record the effects that are happening over here. So I just have number 1 connected because I don't do that very often. And then some virtuals down here at the bottom. On the output side, all that really matters during a tracking session are my monitors and cues. So the first 2 outputs are always going to be your mon left and right. Again, coming from the A unit because it's responsible for all monitor outs as well as alt mons. And this is a question I see a lot. People see grayed out things in the IO matrix, and it can be a little bit confusing. But in this case, because my alt count is 2, on the X16, line outs 1, 2, 3, and 4 are designated as alt 1 and alt 2. So they're going to be grayed out there because of that. Below that, you'll see that line 5, 6, 7, and 8 are free to be assigned either via flex routing, which I might do in a future video, or to be used in your DAW. Below that, you'll see that line 9 through 16, these are also grayed out. This is because they are being used. I'm mirroring my cues to them. These are the outputs that I use to get my cues out to the studio and to the vocal booth. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the dedicated cue video. The rest of this is the returns, some virtual returns, the monitor returns, and the OS. These are the virtual channels that we'll talk about in a dedicated video. And I think that'll do it in this console settings window. There's a display tab, plugins, and MIDI. I'm not going to get into these in this particular setup video. There's just not a lot of pertinent information there. Okay, so I think the last thing that I want to do in this video is to switch over to my DAW, which is Pro Tools, and kind of take a quick look at how everything that we just talked about here carries over into Pro Tools and get a peek as to how some of these things are coming together. Okay, so let me switch over to Pro Tools. And what I have here is I have my template. This is my Pro Tools template session. And if I just scroll back and forth, you'll see that I have a bunch of pre-created tracks, pre-named, and they even have cues on them, pre-fader cues, and so forth. They even have plugins on them that are deactivated, even some levels and pan. So when I go to record, I can come over here and select my drums and make assignments from those mic setups. So here you can see my custom names, right? So if I, those custom names were brought over from Core Audio into the IO setup. So here in the input tab, this looks just like what I set up in console. Same with the output tab. The bus tab is a combination of internal buses and then things that are mapped to outputs that connect to the hardware. And we'll see that as I go through here. So I've got my cues already pre-configured. So when I go to make a cue mix, it's all right here. I can take those levels and send them up to the appropriate cue and create cue mixes here that act as my playback cues. If I scroll over, you'll see all of my pre-configured effects. I keep them deactivated so that they don't come into a session active. And just to give you an idea how this works, in my console session, I have the EMT plate pre-configured with some settings for my live inputs, right? That's what allows me to get the reverb right onto the live mic. And then in Pro Tools, for playback, you'll notice that I have the exact same settings, right? So those same exact settings for playback tracks have the same reverb. So that's how the effects stay constant for the live inputs and for the playback. So these are all my effects. I use a sort of multi-group system that is tied into my Burl summing mixer, but I use it even when I'm not using the Burl. I'll use it internally. That's something I might go into in a future video. Got my stereo bus master, and then my actual stereo bus with my chains on there. And then I have a print track, and then you'll notice I have cues here. I have cue masters in Pro Tools. So when I create a cue send in Pro Tools, I'm not actually addressing the hardware directly. I go through a bus, and then that bus feeds an aux input, and then that aux input goes out to the hardware. And I do that because that gives me control, master control inside of Pro Tools. It also allows me to put little limiters on cue sends to protect headphones and so forth. Okay, so I think that might be it for this video. This is just a video designed to give you the lay of the land, how I have things configured, and then I'm going to build on this in subsequent videos. So hope you enjoyed this, and please post any feedback or questions below. Thanks.